The lunch bell rang at Roosevelt High School, and 16-year-old Emma Martinez felt her stomach twist into familiar knots. It wasn't hunger that made her feel this way. It was the dreaded walk to the cafeteria, where she'd have to navigate through crowds of students, hoping to find a quiet corner where she could eat her sandwich in peace. Emma had always been the quiet one, the girl who preferred books to parties, solitude to social gatherings. Her thick-rimmed glasses and shy demeanor made her an easy target for those who mistook kindness for weakness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma clutched her lunch bag tighter as she entered the bustling cafeteria. The familiar sounds of chattering voices, clattering trays, and scraping chairs filled the air. She kept her head down, her long dark hair creating a curtain around her face as she made her way toward the far corner of the room, her usual spot by the windows. But today would be different. Today, 5 boys from her grade had other plans. Marcus Thompson, the unofficial leader of what everyone called the crew, had been watching Emma for weeks. He wasn't particularly cruel by nature, but peer pressure and teenage bravado had a way of turning ordinary kids into bullies. His friends, Jake, Connor, Tyler, and Brad, followed his lead without question. They were all athletes, popular kids who ruled the social hierarchy of Roosevelt High. "Looks, there's our favorite bookworm," Marcus whispered to his friends, nodding toward Emma as she walked past their table. The boys exchanged glances and grins that spelled trouble. What none of them knew was that Emma's father, Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez, was at that very moment sitting in the school's security office reviewing camera footage as part of his volunteer work with the school's safety committee. Michael had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL before retiring to focus on his family. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, leaving him to raise Emma alone. The transition from military life to single parenthood hadn't been easy, but Michael was determined to be the father Emma needed. As a member of the school's safety committee, Michael often spent his lunch breaks at the school helping to monitor security cameras and ensuring student safety. He knew Emma ate lunch during this period, and sometimes he'd catch glimpses of her on the cafeteria cameras, making sure she was okay. Today, as he scanned the multiple monitor screens, his trained eye immediately picked up on something that made his blood run cold. Emma had just sat down at her usual table when Marcus and his crew approached her. She looked up, surprised, as the 5 boys surrounded her table. Her heart began to race as she realized she was trapped, boys on all sides, her back to the wall. "Hey, Emma," Marcus said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we sit with you?" Before she could answer, the boys had already taken seats around her table, effectively boxing her in. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped her sandwich, trying to appear calm while her mind raced for escape routes. "I'm fine, thanks." Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. Connor laughed, a sound that made Emma's skin crawl. "She talks. We were starting to think you were mute or something." Meanwhile, in the security office, Michael's jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold on camera number 7. His military training kicked in immediately, assessed the situation, identified the threat, planned the response. He could see his daughter's body language clearly, the way she hunched her shoulders, how she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands. These were signs of distress he'd learned to recognize in combat zones, and seeing them in his own daughter triggered every protective instinct he possessed. "So Emma," Tyler continued the group's verbal assault, "we were thinking maybe you could help us with our homework. You're like really smart, right?" Brad nodded eagerly. "Yeah, especially with that history report that's due next week. You could write it for us." Emma's eyes widened. She wanted to say no, wanted to tell them to leave her alone, but the words wouldn't come. She'd never been good at standing up for herself, and now, surrounded by 5 boys who were each twice her size, she felt paralyzed. I don't think, she started, but Marcus cut her off. Come on, Emma, it would be such a huge favor. We'd really appreciate it. His tone was friendly, but there was an underlying threat that made Emma's stomach churn. Michael's hands clenched into fists as he watched his daughter struggle. He could see exactly what was happening, intimidation disguised as a friendly request. In his years as a SEAL, he'd witnessed this type of psychological warfare countless times. The boys might not be physically hurting Emma, but they were using their numbers and size to coerce her into compliance. The camera angle gave Michael a perfect view of Emma's face, and what he saw there broke his heart. His brave, intelligent daughter, who could discuss complex novels with him for hours, who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, who had shown incredible strength during her mother's illness, looked small and frightened. Emma glanced around the cafeteria, hoping a teacher might intervene, but the lunch supervisors were busy dealing with a spilled tray incident on the other side of the room. She was on her own, trapped at a table with 5 boys who clearly had no intention of taking no for an answer. The tension at Emma's table continued to escalate as the boys pressed their advantage. Marcus leaned back in his chair with false casualness, but his eyes never left Emma's face, watching for signs of submission. "You know what, Emma?" Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Maybe homework help isn't enough. We were thinking you could do more for us." Emma's hands were now visibly shaking as she tried to take a sip of her water. What do you mean?" Jake grinned and pulled out his phone. "Well, you're always so mysterious, sitting by yourself. We thought maybe you could be more social. Maybe send us some pictures, personal ones." The color drained from Emma's face as the implications of his words sank in. She looked around desperately, but the cafeteria was as crowded and noisy as ever, and no one seemed to notice her predicament. In the security office, Michael's military training warred with his parental instincts. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to storm into that cafeteria and deal with these boys the way he would handle enemy combatants, but he forced himself to think strategically. Charging in might embarrass Emma and could potentially make things worse for her in the long run. However, he also knew he couldn't just sit there and watch his daughter be terrorized. He quickly pulled out his phone and sent a text to Emma. "Sweetie, I'm in the building. Are you okay?" Emma felt her phone buzz in her pocket, but with the boys watching her every move, she was afraid to check it. Connor noticed her hesitation and smiled coldly. "Everything okay, Emma? You look nervous." "I'm not nervous," Emma lied, her voice barely audible. Tyler laughed. "Right, you're shaking like a leaf. Come on, we're not going to hurt you. We just want to be friends." "Friends don't ask for inappropriate pictures," Emma found herself saying, surprising everyone at the table, including herself. The boys exchanged glances, and Marcus's friendly facade began to slip. "Inappropriate? Come on, Emma, don't be such a prude. Everyone does this stuff." "I don't," Emma said, finding a small spark of courage. "And I won't." Brad leaned forward aggressively. "Maybe you don't understand the situation here, Emma. See, we know you don't have any friends. We know you eat lunch alone every day. We know your mom is dead." Emma gasped at the cruel reference to her mother, tears springing to her eyes. The boys had crossed a line, and they knew it. Michael watched this exchange on the camera and felt something inside him snap. He'd seen enough. These weren't just teenage boys being inappropriate. They were deliberately targeting her daughter's vulnerabilities, using her grief as a weapon. This was psychological warfare, and Emma was clearly outmatched. He stood up from his chair and began moving toward the door, but stopped when he saw Emma do something unexpected on the monitor. Emma wiped her eyes and looked directly at Marcus. "My mother died of cancer 2 years ago. She fought every single day with more courage than you 5 put together will ever have. And you think mentioning her death is going to scare me into doing what you want?" Her voice was still quiet, but there was a strength in it that hadn't been there before. "I want to know why I eat alone? It's because I choose to.
I'd rather sit by myself than surround myself with people who think cruelty makes them powerful." Jake scoffed. Big words from someone with no friends to back them up. "I don't need friends to back me up to know right from wrong," Emma replied. Connor stood up slightly, using his height to intimidate her. "You know what, Emma? I think you need to learn some respect. Maybe we should teach you." "Teach her what?" The voice came from directly behind Connor, and all 6 teenagers froze. Michael Martinez stood there in his crisp volunteer security badge and jeans, but his posture screamed military. His 6'2" frame and broad shoulders cast a shadow over the table, and his dark eyes held a coldness that made the boys' blood run cold. Michael had decided that watching from the cameras wasn't enough. His daughter needed to see that she had backup, that she wasn't alone in this fight. But he also knew this was Emma's moment to find her own strength. "Dad?" Emma whispered, relief flooding her voice. "Hi, sweetheart," Michael said softly to Emma, but his eyes never left the boys. "I was just checking the security cameras when I noticed you had some visitors." Marcus tried to recover his composure. "Oh, Mr. Martinez, we were just talking to Emma about a school project." "Is that so?" From what I observed, it looked like 5 young men cornering one young woman and making demands. In my experience, that's not how school projects typically work. The boys began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler cleared his throat. "We were just leaving, actually." "No," Michael said firmly. "You weren't. You were escalating. See, gentlemen, I've been watching this entire interaction on the security cameras. I saw how you surrounded my daughter, how you trapped her at this table, how you made inappropriate requests, and how you deliberately brought up her deceased mother to hurt her." Connor's face went pale. "We didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you did. Every word, every action was calculated to intimidate and coerce. In my previous line of work, we had names for people who used psychological pressure and threats to get what they wanted from others." Emma watched in amazement as her father addressed her tormentors with calm authority. This was a side of him she'd never seen before. Not the gentle single dad who made her pancakes on Sunday mornings, but the trained professional who had served his country in dangerous places. "Now, you have a choice. You can apologize to my daughter for your behavior, and then you can explain yourselves to Principal Watson. Or we can discuss this behavior with your parents and the school board." The boys looked at each other uncertainly, their earlier bravado completely deflated.
The cafeteria around them seemed to fade into background noise as the 5 boys faced a reckoning they hadn't anticipated. Marcus, who had been so confident just moments before, now couldn't meet Michael's steady gaze. The other boys looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Michael pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, but not in a casual way. His posture remained alert, controlled, the bearing of someone who had been trained to handle threats professionally. Emma noticed that even sitting, her father commanded the space around him in a way that made the boys seem small and uncertain. "Let me tell you what's going to happen," Michael said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "First, you're going to sincerely apologize to my daughter, not because I'm standing here, but because you genuinely understand why your behavior was wrong." Jake shifted nervously. "Look, Mr. Martinez, we were just messing around." "No." Michael's interruption was sharp. "You were not messing around. You deliberately isolated a classmate, used intimidation tactics, made inappropriate sexual requests, and attempted to use her personal tragedy as leverage. That's not messing around. That's predatory behavior." Emma watched her father with new eyes. She had always known he was strong, but she'd never seen this side of his strength. The calm, controlled power that came not from anger, but from absolute certainty in what was right and wrong. Connor tried a different approach. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what? That surrounding someone at a table would make them feel trapped? That asking for inappropriate pictures is sexual harassment? That bringing up a teenager's dead mother is psychological cruelty?
You didn't realize these things?" The boys remained silent, finally beginning to understand the gravity of their actions. Michael continued, "In the military, we have a concept called situational awareness. It means understanding not just what you're doing, but how your actions affect others and what the consequences might be. You five demonstrated a complete lack of situational awareness today." Tyler found his voice. "We're really sorry, Emma. We didn't mean to upset you." Emma looked at him carefully. "Did you mean to get me to do your homework for you?" "Well, yes," Tyler admitted. "Did you mean to ask me for inappropriate pictures?" Tyler's face reddened. "Yes." "Did you mean to hurt me by bringing up my mother?" Tyler looked down at his hands. "Yes." "Then you did mean to upset me. That's what all of those things do. They upset people." Michael felt a surge of pride watching his daughter work through the logic of the situation. This was the Emma he knew, thoughtful, intelligent, capable of seeing through deception to the truth underneath.
Marcus finally spoke up. "We're sorry, Emma. Really sorry. We were being jerks, and we know it." "Why?" Emma asked simply. "Why what? Why were you being jerks? I never did anything to you. I mind my own business. I don't bother anyone. So why would you decide to target me?" The boys exchanged glances, struggling to articulate something they'd never really examined. "Because," Marcus started, then stopped. "Because I was alone?" Emma prompted. "Because I'm quiet? Because you thought I wouldn't fight back?" Brad nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, pretty much." "So you pick on people who seem vulnerable?" "I guess," Jake admitted. Michael watched this exchange with careful attention. Emma was doing something remarkable. She was making these boys confront not just their actions, but their motivations. She was demanding accountability in a way that went deeper than just apologies. "Do you understand why that's wrong?" Emma asked. "Because it's mean?" Connor offered weakly. "It's more than mean," Emma said. "It's cowardly. You picked someone you thought couldn't defend herself. You used your numbers as a weapon. You tried to use my grief as a weapon. That's not just mean, it's cruel and cowardly." Michael had never been prouder of his daughter. She was finding her voice in real time, discovering strength she didn't know she possessed. "So what happens now?" Tyler asked nervously. Michael leaned forward slightly. "Now, you're going to walk with me to Principal Watson's office, and you're going to explain exactly what happened here today. You're going to be honest about your intentions and your actions. Then, you're going to face whatever consequences the school deems appropriate. And then," Emma added, surprising everyone, including herself, "you're going to think about the kind of people you want to be. Because right now, you're the kind of people who gang up on someone eating lunch alone. Is that really who you want to be?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." "Then change," Emma said simply. "Don't just apologize and then go find someone else to pick on. Actually change." As the boy stood up from the table, looking appropriately chastened, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of her own power. Not power over others, but power over herself. The ability to stand up for what was right, to demand respect, to use her voice when it mattered. Michael stood as well, but before following the boys to the principal's office, he placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Not because I showed up, but because of how you handled yourself. Your mother would be proud too." Emma smiled up at her father, feeling stronger than she had in months. "I learned from the best," she said. As they walked toward the principal's office, Michael, Emma, and 5 very subdued teenage boys, other students in the cafeteria began to take notice. Word would spread quickly about what happened here, but Emma found she wasn't worried about that anymore. She had found her voice, and she wasn't planning to lose it again. The walk to Principal Watson's office felt like a funeral march for the 5 boys, while Emma walked with a newfound confidence she didn't know she possessed. The hallways of Roosevelt High seemed different now. Not the intimidating maze she usually navigated with her head down, but simply corridors filled with other teenagers, most of whom were just trying to figure out their own lives. Principal Watson looked up as the unusual group entered her office. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but she also had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had dealt with teenage drama for 2 decades. "Mr. Martinez," she said, recognizing Michael from his volunteer work. "Emma. And gentlemen." Her tone grew cooler as she addressed the boys. "This is quite a group. Should I be concerned?" Michael stepped forward. "Principal Watson, we need to discuss an incident that just occurred in the cafeteria. I observed the entire situation through the security cameras, and I think it's important that you hear about it from all parties involved." Emma watched as her father gave a factual, unemotional account of what had transpired. He described the boys' behavior in clinical terms: the intimidation tactics, the inappropriate requests, the psychological pressure. But he also made sure to highlight Emma's responses, her refusal to be cowed, and her insistence on accountability. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Principal Watson listened intently, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When Michael finished, she turned to the boys. "Is Mr. Martinez's account accurate?" she asked. The 5 boys who had been staring at their shoes nodded reluctantly. "I need to hear you say it," Principal Watson continued. "Marcus, you were the leader in this situation. Tell me what happened." Marcus cleared his throat. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. We surrounded Emma at her lunch table. We asked her to do our homework for us, and when she hesitated, we asked for inappropriate pictures. And when she refused, we brought up her mom's death to try to hurt her," Marcus admitted, his voice barely audible. Principal Watson's expression hardened. "I see. And Jake, Connor, Tyler, Brad, you all participated in this behavior?" Each boy nodded and mumbled their agreement. Emma found herself speaking up. "Principal Watson, I want you to know that I don't think these boys are evil. I think they made really bad choices, and I think they need to understand why those choices were wrong. But I also think they can do better." Principal Watson looked surprised at Emma's mature response. "That's very generous of you, Emma. However, the behavior described here constitutes sexual harassment, intimidation, and emotional cruelty. These are serious violations of our school's code of conduct." Michael nodded approvingly. Emma's forgiveness speaks to her character, but consequences are still necessary. These boys need to understand that their actions have real impacts on other people. "Absolutely," Principal Watson agreed. "Gentlemen, you're looking at immediate suspension pending a full investigation. Your parents will be called and will be having individual meetings with each of you and your families. Additionally, you'll be required to attend sensitivity training sessions with our school counselor." Tyler raised his hand tentatively. "What about sports? We have a game this weekend." Principal Watson's look could have frozen fire. "Tyler, you just participated in sexually harassing a classmate and you're worried about a football game? Your priorities need serious adjustment." Emma spoke up again. "Principal Watson, if I may, I think the boys should have consequences, but I also think they should have a chance to make things right. Maybe community service or helping with anti-bullying programs?" Michael looked at his daughter with amazement. Even after what she'd been through, she was thinking about restorative rather than just punitive justice. Principal Watson considered this. "Emma, your suggestion shows remarkable maturity. We'll certainly consider constructive consequences in addition to the disciplinary actions." As the meeting continued, details were arranged for parent conferences, suspensions were officially documented, and plans were made for follow-up counseling.
Throughout it all, Emma remained poised and articulate, a far cry from the frightened girl who had been cornered at lunch just an hour earlier. When they finally left the principal's office, Michael and Emma walked down the hallway together. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Michael asked gently. Emma thought for a moment. "Different. Stronger, I guess. Like I found a part of myself I didn't know was there." "That part was always there. You just needed to discover it. Your mother had that same quiet strength. She never backed down from what was right, even when it was hard." Emma smiled at the mention of her mother. For once, thinking about her didn't bring only sadness. It brought pride and connection to a strength that ran in her family. "Dad," Emma said as they reached the main entrance, "can I ask you something about what happened back there?" "Of course." "Did you ever have to deal with situations like this? I mean, people using intimidation and psychological pressure?" Michael paused, considering how to answer honestly without sharing details that might be inappropriate for his teenage daughter. "Yes," he said finally, "in different contexts, but yes. The tactics those boys used, isolation, intimidation, exploiting vulnerabilities, those are actually textbook psychological pressure techniques. What impressed me was how you recognized them for what they were and refused to give in." Emma felt another surge of confidence. "I did, didn't I?" "You absolutely did. And more than that, you made them confront their own behavior. That takes real courage and intelligence." They walked to Michael's truck in comfortable silence, both processing the events of the day. As Michael started the engine, Emma looked back at the school building. "Dad, I think I want to do something about bullying at our school. Not just for me, but for other kids who might not have someone watching security cameras." Michael smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm not sure yet. Maybe a peer support program? Or awareness campaigns? I need to think about it more." "Well, you'll have my full support, whatever you decide." That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom working on homework, but her mind kept drifting to the events of the day. The incident in the cafeteria felt like a turning point, but she wasn't sure exactly what she was turning toward. She'd discovered she had a voice, but now she needed to figure out how to use it. Downstairs, Michael was on the phone with his brother David, a high school teacher in Colorado, discussing what had happened. "The thing is, Dave, I'm proud as hell of how Emma handled herself, but I'm also worried about what comes next," Michael said, pacing in the kitchen. "These boys have friends. Their parents might not be happy about the suspensions. I don't want Emma to become a bigger target." "Mike, from what you've told me, Emma didn't just stand up to bullies today, she became a leader. Kids like that don't usually become bigger targets. They become examples for other kids who are tired of being pushed around." Meanwhile, Emma's phone was buzzing with messages. Word had spread quickly through the school's social media networks about what had happened in the cafeteria. To her surprise, most of the messages were supportive. "Emma, I heard what happened at lunch. You're braver than I ever could be." Sarah from her AP history class. "Those guys have been jerks to lots of people. Thanks for standing up to them." Miguel, someone she barely knew but had seen eating alone sometimes. "My little sister is in middle school, and she gets picked on. I'm going to tell her about what you did." Jessica, a senior Emma had never talked to. But there were also messages that made Emma's stomach clench. "Great job getting those guys in trouble over nothing." Anonymous account. "Hope you're ready for payback." Another anonymous message. Emma stared at the threatening messages, feeling some of her newfound confidence waver. She was about to go downstairs to tell her father when there was a knock on her bedroom door. "Come in," she called. Michael entered carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, Emma's favorite comfort drink. He set one on her desk and settled into the chair by her window. "Rough evening?" he asked, nodding toward her phone. Emma showed him the messages, both supportive and threatening. Michael read through them carefully, his expression growing serious at the anonymous threats. "Emma, I want you to understand something. When you stand up for what's right, especially in a public way, there will always be people who don't like it. Some people are invested in keeping things the way they are, even when the way things are is wrong. Are you saying I shouldn't have done it? Emma asked. Absolutely not. I'm saying that doing the right thing sometimes comes with a cost, and you need to be prepared for that. But you also need to know that you don't face that cost alone. Emma sipped her hot chocolate, thinking, Dad, can I ask you about your time in the military? Not the classified stuff, but did you ever have to make hard choices that made other people angry? Michael considered his answer carefully. Yes, sweetheart, many times. There were situations where doing the right thing meant making enemies, putting myself at risk, or facing consequences I didn't want to face. But you know what I learned? What? I learned that you can't control other people's reactions to your choices. You can only control whether you make choices you can live with. And I can tell you from experience that living with the consequences of doing the right thing is always easier than living with the consequences of doing nothing when you knew you should act. Emma nodded, feeling some of her resolve return. The anonymous messages are cowards, aren't they? If they really believed they were right, they'd put their names on them. That's a very astute observation, Michael said proudly. Over the next few days, Emma watched as the consequences of her confrontation rippled through Roosevelt High School. The 5 boys served their suspensions, and when they returned, they kept their distance from her. Some of their friends were hostile, shooting dirty looks her way in the hallways, but Emma found she cared less about their disapproval than she'd expected. More surprising was the response from other students. Emma noticed that her usual lunch table wasn't so isolated anymore. Sarah from AP History asked if she could sit with her. Miguel joined them the next day. Soon, Emma found herself at the center of a small but growing group of students who had previously eaten alone or felt marginalized.
It's funny, Sarah said one day as they ate lunch together. I always thought you were just really shy. I didn't realize you were actually really observant and thoughtful. Emma smiled. I think I was hiding from other people, but also from myself. What changed? Miguel asked. Emma thought about it. I guess I realized that being quiet was okay, but being silent when something wrong was happening wasn't okay. There's a difference between choosing not to speak and being too afraid to speak. Word of Emma's anti-bullying ideas began to spread. Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor, approached her after psychology class one afternoon. Emma, I heard you might be interested in starting some kind of peer support program. I'd love to talk with you about that. Really? Emma asked, surprised that her tentative ideas had already reached the faculty. Absolutely. What you did in that cafeteria took the kind of courage and insight that could really help other students. Plus, your father mentioned you might be interested in doing something more systemic about bullying. Emma felt a flutter of excitement. I am! I've been thinking about it a lot. I keep wondering how many other kids are sitting alone, feeling trapped, not knowing how to speak up for themselves. Well, let's talk about turning those thoughts into action, Mrs. Rodriguez said. That evening, Emma sat at her desk with a notebook, sketching out ideas for what she was starting to think of as the stand-up program. She envisioned peer mentoring, educational workshops about recognizing different types of bullying, and safe reporting systems for students who witnessed harassment but didn't know how to intervene. 3 weeks after the cafeteria incident, Emma stood in front of Principal Watson's desk, no longer the frightened girl who had been cornered by bullies, but a young woman with a mission. She held a folder containing her detailed proposal for the stand-up program, complete with research on successful anti-bullying initiatives from other schools. Emma, I have to say, this proposal is impressive, Principal Watson said, flipping through the pages. You've clearly put a lot of thought and research into this. Emma felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but this time it was the good kind. The excitement of presenting something she believed in rather than the terror of being trapped.
Thank you, Principal Watson. I've been working with Mrs. Rodriguez to make sure the program would actually be helpful and not just feel-good activities that don't change anything. Michael sat in a chair beside Emma, present for moral support, but letting his daughter take the lead. He watched with pride as Emma articulated her vision with confidence and clarity. The core idea, Emma continued, is that most students don't want to see their classmates being bullied, but they don't know how to intervene safely. The stand-up program would train student mentors to recognize different types of harassment and give them tools to help without putting themselves at risk. Principal Watson leaned forward with interest. Tell me more about the safe intervention strategies. Emma opened to a specific page in her proposal. Well, sometimes direct confrontation isn't the best approach, especially if it could escalate the situation, but there are other ways to help, like the friendly interruption. If you see someone being harassed, you can walk up and ask the victim about something unrelated, like homework or plans for the weekend. It breaks up the dynamic and gives the person being targeted a chance to leave with you. That's very thoughtful, Principal Watson noted, making marks on the document. We'd also have anonymous reporting systems, not for punishment necessarily, but for early intervention. Sometimes kids are heading toward becoming bullies, but haven't crossed serious lines yet. If we can identify those situations early, we might be able to address them before they become major problems. Michael couldn't help but smile. Emma was displaying the same strategic thinking skills that had served him well in military operations. Identify the problem, understand the various factors involved, develop multiple approaches to address different scenarios. And what about training for the student mentors? Principal Watson asked. That's where Mrs. Rodriguez comes in. She has developed a curriculum that covers recognizing signs of distress, de-escalation techniques, understanding different types of bullying, not just physical, but social, emotional, and cyberbullying too. The mentors would meet monthly for ongoing training and support. Emma pulled out another section of her proposal. We'd also have educational assemblies for the whole school, but not the boring kind where adults lecture at students. We want student-led presentations that use real scenarios and role-playing to help everyone understand what bullying looks like and what they can do about it. Principal Watson was nodding approvingly. Emma, this is remarkably comprehensive. How did you develop all of these ideas? Emma glanced at her father, then back at Principal Watson. Honestly, what happened to me in the cafeteria made me realize that I'd been dealing with smaller versions of that kind of treatment for years, but I just accepted it as normal. I started researching and found out that lots of students feel the same way. They think they just have to endure harassment because that's how teenagers are, but it doesn't have to be that way. And your research sources? Principal Watson continued, clearly impressed by the professional quality of Emma's work. Emma flipped to the back of her proposal. I studied programs that have been successful at schools in other states, looked at research from anti-bullying organizations, and even reached out to some colleges that have peer mentoring programs to see what works at different age levels. Michael felt another surge of pride. Emma had approached this project with the same thoroughness and attention to detail that he'd tried to instill in her since childhood. And I'm particularly interested in your emphasis on bystander empowerment, Principal Watson said. Most anti-bullying programs focus on either the bullies or the victims, but you're addressing the largest group, the students who witness these incidents. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Most bullying happens when there are other students around, but those students feel helpless to do anything. If we can give them tools and confidence to intervene safely, we can change the whole social dynamic of the school. Principal Watson closed the proposal and looked directly at Emma. I'm going to be honest with you, Emma. When your father first told me about your ideas, I was skeptical. We've tried anti-bullying programs before, and they often don't create lasting change. But this proposal shows a level of insight and practical thinking that I rarely see from adults, let alone students. Emma felt her heart racing. Does that mean you'll approve it? I'm going to do more than approve it, Principal Watson said with a smile. I'm going to fully support it. We'll fund the training materials, provide release time for Mrs. Rodriguez to coordinate the program, and give you whatever resources you need to make this successful. Emma looked stunned. Really? Really. But Emma, I want you to understand what you're taking on. Running a program like this is a big responsibility. You'll need to recruit mentors, coordinate with faculty, handle conflicts when they arise, and constantly work to improve and adapt the program. Are you ready for that? Emma thought about the scared girl who had been cornered in the cafeteria just a few weeks ago, then looked at her father, who had shown her what it meant to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult.
Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. As they left the principal's office, Michael put his arm around Emma's shoulders. Your mother would be so proud, he said softly. She always believed that the best way to honor difficult experiences was to use them to help other people avoid the same pain. Emma smiled, feeling her mother's presence in a way she hadn't since the funeral. Dad, can I ask you something? When you were in the SEALs, what was the most important thing you learned about leadership? Michael thought carefully. That real leadership isn't about having power over other people. It's about empowering other people to do things they didn't know they were capable of. You've just demonstrated that kind of leadership, sweetheart. Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into developing the stand-up program. She created application forms for student mentors, worked with Mrs. Rodriguez to schedule training sessions, and began planning the educational assemblies. But more than that, she found herself becoming a different kind of student at Roosevelt High. Students who had never spoken to her before began approaching her with their own stories of harassment or intimidation. Some were looking for help, others just wanted someone to listen, and a few wanted to get involved in the stand-up program themselves. Emma, said a sophomore named Ashley after school one day, I heard about what you're doing with the anti-bullying thing. Can I talk to you about something that happened to me? As Ashley shared her story of being cyberbullied by former friends, Emma realized that her experience in the cafeteria had been just a beginning. She was becoming someone other students trusted, someone they saw as an advocate, an ally. The thing is, I didn't know there was anything I could do about it. I thought I just had to deal with it until it stopped on its own. Emma nodded, remembering her own sense of helplessness. That's exactly why we need the stand-up program. Students shouldn't have to suffer in silence just because they don't know what their options are. That evening, as Emma worked on mentor training materials at the kitchen table, Michael watched her with amazement. The transformation in his daughter over the past month had been remarkable. But what impressed him most was that the change seemed to come from deep within her, rather than being imposed from outside. Emma, he said, setting down his coffee cup, I want to tell you something. She looked up from her work, pencil still in hand. When I was deployed, I saw a lot of difficult things, but I also saw how ordinary people could become extraordinary when they decided to take responsibility for something bigger than themselves. That's what you're doing here. Emma set down her pencil and gave her father her full attention. You took a terrible experience and refused to let it make you smaller or more afraid. Instead, you used it to grow stronger and to help other people. That takes a special kind of courage, and I want you to know that I see it and I'm proud of it. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of pride rather than sadness. I learned it from you, Dad, and from Mom. You both taught me that when something is wrong, you don't just complain about it, you work to fix it. Michael smiled. Your mother used to say that the world changes one person at a time, one choice at a time. You're living proof of that. As Emma returned to her work, she felt a deep sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. The stand-up program was important, but it was more than just an anti-bullying initiative. It was proof that students didn't have to accept the status quo, that they could identify problems and work to solve them, that their voices and their choices mattered.
2 months after the cafeteria incident, Roosevelt High School was buzzing with anticipation for the first official stand-up program assembly. Emma stood backstage in the auditorium, reviewing her notes one final time. Her hands were steady now, a far cry from the trembling girl who had faced 5 bullies over lunch. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and even some parents who had heard about the student-led initiative. Emma peeked through the curtain and spotted her father in the 3rd row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Next to him sat Mrs. Rodriguez and Principal Watson, both beaming with pride. "You ready for this, Emma?" asked Marcus Thompson. Emma turned around, still sometimes surprised by the sight of her former tormentor. Marcus had become one of the most dedicated members of the stand-up program, working tirelessly to make amends for his past behavior and help other students avoid making the same mistakes he had. "I think so," Emma replied. "Are you nervous about your part?" Marcus nodded. "Terrified, actually, but the good kind of terrified, you know?" Emma understood exactly what he meant. Over the past several weeks, she had watched Marcus transform from a bully into an advocate. His journey hadn't been easy. Many students were skeptical of his sincerity, and he'd had to work hard to rebuild trust. But his willingness to publicly acknowledge his mistakes and work to prevent others from following his path had gradually won over even his harshest critics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Watson's voice carried through the auditorium, "please welcome the founder and director of Roosevelt High's stand-up program, Emma Martinez." Emma walked onto the stage, no longer the invisible girl who tried to blend into the background. She wore a confident smile and carried herself with the poise of someone who had found her purpose. The applause was warm and genuine, with several students giving her a standing ovation. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice clear and strong through the microphone. 3 months ago, I was cornered in our cafeteria by 5 boys who thought they could intimidate me into doing whatever they wanted. I was scared, I felt powerless, and I didn't think anyone would help me." The auditorium fell completely silent. Even though many students had heard versions of this story, hearing it directly from Emma carried a different weight. "But here's what I learned that day. I wasn't actually powerless. I had more strength than I knew, and I wasn't as alone as I felt. But most importantly, I learned that staying silent about injustice doesn't protect you from it. It just guarantees that it will continue." Emma gestured toward the wings of the stage. "Today, I want to share the stage with someone who learned the same lesson, but from a different perspective. Marcus Thompson was one of those 5 boys who cornered me. He could have stayed defensive, made excuses, or simply served his suspension and moved on. Instead, he chose a harder path." Marcus walked onto the stage, and the auditorium's reaction was mixed. Some applause, some murmurs, and some obvious skepticism. Marcus took his place at the second microphone, visibly nervous, but determined. "I'm not here to make excuses for what I did. I can't take back the fear I caused Emma, or the pain I inflicted by bringing up her mother's death. What I did was cruel, cowardly, and wrong, and I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it."
Emma watched the audience carefully. She could see students leaning forward, genuinely interested in what Marcus had to say. This was exactly what the stand-up program was about, creating space for difficult but necessary conversations. So why did I do it? Because I thought it would make me look cool to my friends. Because I thought picking on someone who seemed vulnerable would make me seem powerful. Because I was too immature and selfish to consider how my actions would affect another human being. Marcus paused, gathering his courage for the hardest part of his speech. "But here's what I want you to understand," he said. Every single person in this auditorium has the potential to be a bully, and every single person has the potential to be a victim. The difference isn't whether you're strong or weak, popular or unpopular. The difference is the choices you make when you see something wrong happening. Emma stepped back to her microphone. That's what the stand-up program is really about. It's not about creating a world without conflict. That's impossible. It's about creating a school where every student knows they have options when they witness harassment, where victims know they have support, and where potential bullies understand the real impact of their choices before they make them. The presentation continued with role-playing scenarios led by the student mentors Emma had trained. They demonstrated the friendly interruption technique, showed how to safely document cyberbullying, and explained how to report serious incidents without fear of retaliation. But the most powerful moment came when Emma opened the floor for questions and comments from the audience. A junior named David raised his hand. "Emma, I have to ask, weren't you worried about making Marcus and the other guys mad by getting them in trouble? I mean, they could have made things really bad for you after that." Emma nodded. "I was terrified of that, actually. And they did try to intimidate me through anonymous messages and dirty looks. But you know what I realized? They were already making things bad for me. They were already making me afraid to eat lunch, afraid to speak up in class, afraid to exist in my own school. The only thing that changed was that I stopped pretending everything was okay." Marcus stepped forward. "And David, I want to answer your question too. Emma standing up to us didn't make us matter. It made us face the truth about what we were doing. That was uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. If she hadn't confronted us, we probably would have kept escalating our behavior until we really hurt someone." A senior named Jennifer raised her hand. "This is all great in theory, but what about when the bullying is coming from popular kids? What if standing up means becoming a social outcast?" Emma had been waiting for this question. "Jennifer, that's probably the hardest scenario to deal with, and I won't pretend it's easy. But here's what I've learned. Being popular with people who think bullying is acceptable isn't actually worth very much. The friends worth having are the ones who respect you for doing the right thing, even when it's difficult." The assembly had been a resounding success, but Emma knew that real change would be measured not by applause, but by the daily choices students made in hallways, classrooms, and cafeterias. Over the following weeks, she watched carefully for signs that the stand-up program was making a real difference. The first indication came from an unexpected source. Tyler, one of the original 5 boys from the cafeteria incident, approached Emma after school one day as she was putting materials into her locker. "Emma, can I talk to you for a minute?" Tyler asked, clearly nervous. Emma turned to face him, noting that he was alone, not surrounded by his usual group of friends. "Sure, Tyler. What's on your mind?" "I wanted to tell you about something that happened today," Tyler said, fidgeting with his backpack strap. "I saw these sophomore guys hassling a freshman girl in the hallway. They were blocking her path, making comments about her appearance, and normally I would have just walked past, or maybe even laughed along with them." Emma waited patiently for Tyler to continue. "But I kept thinking about what you said in the assembly, about how every person has the potential to be a bully or a victim, depending on the choices they make. And I realized I had a choice to make right then." "What did you do?" Emma asked. "I used that friendly interruption thing you taught us. I walked up and asked the girl if she was heading to the library because I needed help finding a book. It worked. She came with me, and the guys just kind of dispersed." Emma smiled. "That's exactly how it's supposed to work. How did you feel afterward?" Tyler thought about it. "Better than I expected. Like I had actually done something useful for once, instead of just being part of the problem." Similar stories began reaching Emma throughout the week. Sarah, who had become one of Emma's closest friends, reported that she had helped a student being cyberbullied by taking screenshots of the harassment and helping them report it to teachers. Miguel had intervened when he saw a group of kids making fun of a student with a learning disability. But perhaps the most significant change was in the school's overall atmosphere.
Teachers began commenting that students seemed more willing to speak up about problems, and the anonymous reporting system Emma had implemented was receiving tips about potential issues before they escalated into major incidents. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped Emma in the hallway one afternoon with exciting news. "Emma, I just got off the phone with the district superintendent. Word about the stand-up program has reached the school board, and they want to implement similar programs in other schools throughout the district." Emma felt a mixture of pride and overwhelm. "Really? They want to expand it?" "Not only that," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "but they want you to help train student leaders at other schools. You'd be like a consultant, helping other teenagers develop their own anti-bullying initiatives." That evening, Emma shared the news with her father over dinner. Michael listened with the same pride he'd felt watching his daughter find her voice in that cafeteria confrontation months earlier. "So, what do you think? Should I do it?" Michael considered the question seriously. "Emma, that's a decision only you can make. But let me ask you this. When you were being cornered by those boys, what would you have given to know that someone like you existed? Someone who had been through something similar and found a way not just to survive, but to thrive?" Emma understood immediately what her father was getting at. "You think I have a responsibility to help other kids? I think you have an opportunity to help other kids. There's a difference. Responsibility implies obligation. Opportunity implies choice. You get to choose whether you want to take on this role." Emma played with her food thoughtfully. "It's scary. What if I mess it up? What if I give other kids bad advice?" Michael smiled. "Emma, do you remember what I told you about leadership when you were developing the stand-up program? That real leadership is about empowering other people to do things they didn't know they were capable of."
Exactly. You wouldn't be going to other schools to solve their problems for them. You'd be going to help their students discover their own strength and develop their own solutions. You'd be teaching them what you learned, that they have more power than they think they do. Emma felt her confidence growing. "And if I make mistakes, then you'll learn from them, just like you learned from being bullied. Every expert was once a beginner, sweetheart. The only difference between experts and beginners is that experts have made more mistakes and learned from them." Over the next few days, Emma found herself observing her own school with new eyes. She watched as student mentors she had trained helped resolve conflicts before they escalated. She saw former victims walking with more confidence, and she noticed that the social dynamics that had once seemed fixed and unchangeable were actually quite fluid when students decided to behave differently. The most profound moment came during lunch one Tuesday afternoon. Emma was sitting at her usual table, no longer alone, but surrounded by friends and fellow stand-up program members, when she noticed a new student eating by herself in the corner. The girl looked lost and lonely, much like Emma had felt before finding her voice. Without thinking about it, Emma got up and walked over to the new student's table. "Hi," Emma said with a warm smile. "I'm Emma. Are you new here?" The girl looked up with obvious relief. "Yes, I'm Jessica. I just transferred from across town." "Mind if I sit with you? I can tell you about some of the clubs and activities here if you're interested." As Emma sat down with Jessica, she realized she had become the person she had needed when she was struggling. She was no longer the scared girl who ate lunch alone, hoping not to be noticed. She had become someone who noticed others who might be struggling and took action to help them. Marcus walked by their table and caught Emma's eye. He nodded approvingly and gave her a small smile, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement that the work they were doing together was making a real difference. Emma smiled back, then turned her attention to Jessica, ready to help another student discover that they weren't as alone as they might feel. 6 months after the cafeteria incident, Emma stood in the conference room at the district office, presenting the stand-up program model to a room full of principals, counselors, and school board members. But she wasn't alone. Marcus stood beside her, along with Sarah and Miguel, each representing different aspects of the program's success. The key insight, Emma explained to the assembled educators, is that most anti-bullying programs focus on reactive measures, what to do after bullying has occurred. The stand-up program emphasizes proactive measures, creating a school culture where bullying is less likely to happen in the first place. Dr. Patricia Williams, the district superintendent, leaned forward with interest. Emma, can you give us some concrete data on the program's effectiveness? Emma clicked to the next slide in her presentation. Certainly. Since implementing stand-up at Roosevelt High, we've seen a 60% decrease in disciplinary incidents related to harassment. More importantly, we've seen a 75% increase in student reports of feeling safe at school, based on our quarterly climate surveys. Marcus stepped forward to add his perspective. Dr. Williams, I think the numbers are important, but what's really changed is the social dynamics. As someone who used to be part of the problem, I can tell you that the stand-up program doesn't just teach victims how to respond, it teaches potential bullies like me how to recognize our behavior and change it before we cause real harm. Sarah nodded in agreement. And for bystanders like I used to be, the program gave us tools to help without putting ourselves at risk. I'm not naturally confrontational, but I learned that I could still make a difference through supportive actions and safe reporting. Miguel added, the peer mentoring aspect has been huge. Students trust other students more than they trust adults sometimes, especially when it comes to social problems. Having trained student mentors means problems get identified and addressed faster. Dr. Williams made notes as each student spoke. I'm impressed by your collaborative approach. Many student-led initiatives are dominated by a single personality, but you've clearly built a team. Emma smiled. That wasn't accidental. One of the first things I learned when I started researching anti-bullying strategies was that sustainable change requires multiple perspectives and distributed leadership. If the program depended entirely on me, it would fall apart as soon as I graduate. Speaking of graduation, said Principal Davis from Lincoln High School, how do you plan to maintain continuity when you and your current leaders move on? Emma had been preparing for this question for months. We've built succession planning into the program structure. Current mentors are responsible for identifying and training their replacements. We also maintain detailed documentation of all our procedures, training materials, and lessons learned so that future student leaders don't have to start from scratch. Marcus stepped forward again. And we've learned that the most effective leaders for this program are often students who have personal experience with bullying, either as victims or former perpetrators. Those students understand the dynamics in ways that naturally empathetic students might not. The meeting continued for another hour, with district officials asking detailed questions about implementation, funding, training protocols, and measurement strategies. Emma found herself energized by their interest and their challenging questions. This was exactly the kind of serious engagement she had hoped for when she first proposed the program. After the presentation ended, Dr. Williams approached Emma privately. Emma, I want you to know that in my 25 years in education, I've rarely seen a student-led initiative with this level of sophistication and impact. You've not only identified a real problem, but you've developed a comprehensive solution and demonstrated its effectiveness. Emma felt a familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with pride. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Does this mean you'll approve expansion to other schools? More than that. We want to make this a district-wide initiative with you serving as the student consultant for implementation. We'd also like to nominate the stand-up program for the state's Excellence in Student Leadership Award.
Emma was stunned. When she had first stood up to those 5 boys in the cafeteria, she never could have imagined that her response would lead to recognition at the state level. That evening, Emma called her father with the news. Michael was at work. He had recently started a new job as a security consultant for school districts, helping them improve their safety protocols and crisis response procedures. Emma's experience with the bullying incident had actually inspired him to pursue work that would help protect other students. "Dad, you're not going to believe what happened today," Emma said excitedly, launching into a description of the district meeting and Dr. Williams's response. Michael listened with the deep satisfaction of a parent watching their child exceed every expectation. "Emma, I'm proud of you, but I'm not surprised. You've been building toward this for months. It's just crazy to think that something so terrible turned into something so positive." Michael paused thoughtfully. "Emma, can I tell you something I learned in the military about turning adversity into strength?" "Of course." "The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. What happened to you in that cafeteria was like fire. It was painful, it was scary, and it could have broken you. But instead, you used that heat to forge yourself into something stronger. You took an experience that was designed to make you feel powerless and used it to discover just how powerful you actually are." Emma wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Mom would have liked this, wouldn't she? The stand-up program, I mean." "She would have been amazed by it," Michael said softly. "Your mother always believed that the best way to honor pain was to use it to prevent other people from experiencing the same pain. That's exactly what you've done." As Emma hung up the phone, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a scared teenager eating lunch alone, hoping to remain invisible. Tonight, she was a recognized student leader preparing to help schools across the state create safer, more supportive environments for all students. But more than the external recognition, Emma was proud of who she had become in the process. Someone who no longer needed to hide, someone who could transform fear into action, and someone who understood that real strength came not from avoiding difficult situations, but from facing them with courage and integrity.
1 year after the cafeteria incident, Emma Martinez stood at the podium of the State Capitol Auditorium, preparing to deliver the keynote address at the annual Student Leadership Conference. In the audience sat students, educators, and parents from across the state, all gathered to learn about innovative approaches to creating safer school environments. But Emma's eyes were drawn to 2 specific faces in the front row. Her father, Michael, whose proud smile reminded her of how far they had both come, and Marcus Thompson, now her co-director of the Stand Up program, and living proof that people could fundamentally change when given the opportunity and support to do so. "A year ago," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "I was cornered in my school cafeteria by 5 boys who thought they could intimidate me into compliance. I was terrified, I felt helpless, and I believed I had no choice but to either give in to their demands or suffer the consequences of resistance." The audience listened intently as Emma recounted the story that had become the foundation legend of the Stand Up program. But what I discovered that day was that I actually had more choices than I realized. I could find my voice, I could demand respect, and I could refuse to accept that harassment was just a normal part of teenage life. More importantly, I learned that my response to that situation could either make me smaller and more afraid, or it could make me stronger and more determined to prevent other students from facing the same experience. Emma gestured toward Marcus in the audience. "Today, one of those 5 boys who cornered me is my closest collaborator in creating safer schools. Marcus Thompson didn't just apologize for his behavior. He dedicated himself to understanding why he had acted that way and to helping other potential bullies make better choices. His transformation taught me that people are capable of remarkable change when they're given honest feedback, genuine consequences, and the support to become better versions of themselves." The applause was warm and sustained. Emma waited for it to die down before continuing. "Over the past year, the Stand Up program has been implemented in 43 schools across our state. We've trained over 500 student mentors, prevented countless incidents of harassment, and helped create school cultures where students feel empowered to speak up for themselves and others. But the statistics, while encouraging, don't tell the whole story." Emma clicked to her next slide, which showed a collage of photos from various schools. Students working together in peer mediation sessions, mentor training workshops, and awareness assemblies. "The real story is in the individual transformations. Students like Jennifer, who went from being a silent bystander to becoming a peer mediator who has helped resolve dozens of conflicts. Students like David, who used to eat lunch alone because of social anxiety, but now leads friendship circles for other isolated students. Students like Ashley, who is being cyberbullied, but is now training other students in digital citizenship and online safety. Emma paused, looking out at the diverse audience of young people who had come to learn about student leadership. What I want you to understand is that each of these transformations started with a single choice, the choice to believe that things could be different, and the choice to take action to make that difference a reality. You don't need to be naturally confident or outgoing to be a leader. You don't need to be the most popular student or the highest achiever. You just need to care about something more than you care about being comfortable. In the audience, Michael felt a deep sense of satisfaction watching his daughter command the attention of hundreds of people. This was the same girl who, just over a year ago, had been afraid to speak up in her own defense. Now she was inspiring students across the state to find their own voices and take action in their own schools. Emma continued her presentation, sharing specific implementation strategies, discussing common challenges and solutions, and answering questions from student leaders eager to start their own anti-bullying initiatives. But as the formal presentation wound down, she returned to the personal story that had started it all. "I want to close by talking about something my father taught me," Emma said, catching Michael's eye in the audience. "My dad is a retired Navy SEAL, and he taught me that real strength isn't about dominating other people or making them afraid of you. Real strength is about using whatever power you have to protect people who need protection, to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and to create space for others to find their own strength." Emma's voice grew stronger as she approached her conclusion. "That day in the cafeteria, I could have just endured the harassment in silence, graduated, and moved on with my life. But I realized that my silence wouldn't just hurt me, it would hurt every student who came after me and faced similar treatment. By finding my voice, I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting future students I would never meet, creating a legacy of courage that would outlast my own high school experience." The standing ovation that followed was sustained and enthusiastic. Students throughout the auditorium were on their feet, many of them clearly inspired to return to their own schools with new energy and determination. After the presentation, Emma was surrounded by students and educators eager to learn more about the Stand Up program. She spent nearly an hour answering individual questions, sharing contact information, and encouraging young people who had their own ideas for creating positive change in their schools. Finally, as the crowd thinned out, Michael and Marcus approached the stage. "How does it feel to be officially famous?" Marcus asked with a grin. Emma laughed. "Weird, but good weird. A year ago, I never would have imagined standing in front of hundreds of people and telling them my story." Michael stepped forward and wrapped his daughter in a proud hug. "Your mother would have been amazed," he said softly. "She always said that the most important thing we could do with our lives was to make things a little better for the people who come after us. You've done that in ways she never could have imagined." Emma felt tears of gratitude and joy in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without both of you," she said, looking at her father and Marcus. "Dad, you showed me what courage looks like in action. And Marcus, you showed me that people can change, grow, and become allies even after they've made terrible mistakes." Marcus nodded seriously. "Emma, you gave me a chance to become someone I could respect when I didn't deserve it. That's changed my whole life." As they walked out of the Capitol building together, Emma reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been a victim of bullying. Today, she was a recognized leader in anti-bullying advocacy. But more importantly, she had discovered that inside every person, victim, bully, or bystander, was the potential for courage, growth, and positive change. The Stand Up program would continue to grow and evolve, helping thousands of students across the state and eventually the country. But for Emma, the most important victory was personal. She had proven to herself and others that no one has to accept injustice as inevitable. With courage, determination, and the willingness to turn pain into purpose, any person can become a force for positive change in their community. As they reached Michael's truck, Emma turned back to look at the Capitol building one more time. Tomorrow, she would be back at Roosevelt High School, working on homework, eating lunch with friends, and continuing the daily work of making her school a safer, more supportive place for all students. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate how far she had come. From a scared, isolated teenager to a confident young woman who had found her voice and used it to amplify the voices of others. The journey had been difficult, sometimes painful, but ultimately transformative in ways she never could have imagined. "Ready to go home?" asked Michael. Emma smiled and climbed into the truck. "Ready." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.